Okay, let's see. So we have the Taisus over here that we discussed the bracha on what size of eating does a person need to recite the bracha. So because the Gemara had asked about eating an olive, and if a person eats the olive, so they're not eating the pit inside the olive. So what comes out is that they didn't really eat the size of an olive. And that was the Gemara's question. The Gemara answered that the size of an olive that you need to recite a bracha on is a medium-sized olive, which the Gemara uses the term azayas aguri, and Rabbi Yochanan had eaten a large olive. So even though obviously he didn't eat the pit inside, but he did eat the large olive, which measured to be the size of a medium-sized olive. If you just measure the flesh of the olive relative to the medium-sized olive, it would have been enough to require him to recite an after blessing. Now, keep in mind that the Gemara had debated what the after blessing was, what bracha he recited. This was a question in the Gemara. Initially, the Gemara wanted to prove that the bracha on cooked fruits or vegetables should be the same as if they were uncooked, and therefore the bracha that he recited on a salted olive was Bayrei Pri Ha'etz, even though it's considered cooked because it was salted. And the after bracha would have been Alo Eitz Val Pri Ha'etz. The Gemara answered that it's not necessarily a proof, because it could be that he recited a shahakol on this salted olive, which is considered like a cooked olive, and he recited a shahakol on it because once something is cooked, maybe it doesn't retain its term it's not called a fruit anymore, and because of that, maybe he recited a shahakol and a bayrei nefashis. Then the Gemara asked this question after about how did he recite this, how did he recite a bracha? It's less than a measurement. Now, Tosfos is bothered. What bracha are we talking about? Are we talking about the first bracha or the after bracha? So the initial statement of Tosfos is obviously we must be talking about the after bracha did not have the right measurement, because the beginning bracha before you eat, you recite a bracha on any amount. Why is that? Why would you recite a bracha on any amount before you eat, but only on a certain measurement after you eat? And the answer is because the bracha before you eat is based on not benefiting from this world without a bracha. So in order to benefit from this world, anything, so benefit, you're benefiting even less than a large measurement, and any amount you're benefiting from. So if you're benefiting from it, you got to recite a bracha. The bracha after eating is, of course, also on benefiting, but it's based on a verse that says the word achila, v'achalta v'savata uveirachta. So based on the word achila, and even though the benching is really based, the biblical benching is based on savata, being satisfied, but the term, but nevertheless, we do see the term achila, which really means eating, and eating, the Chachamim understood to mean the size of an olive, and therefore the size of an olive would be the size for an after bracha. Now, and that's the way Tosfos begins his statement, that we must be talking about the after bracha, where the size would be a olive, and but the beginning bracha, you're not allowed to benefit, it would be any amount. Now, Tosfos then jumps to the bracha of drinking. And Tosfos says regarding drinking, if you drank any amount, you would be required for a bracha also. For drinking as well would have the same thing. The bracha before drinking would be any amount. The bracha after drinking, that's where Tosfos gets himself into this issue of what is the amount of after drinking. Tosfos says the bracha after drinking, it's actually questionable what the wording in this Tosfos, because the way the wording that we see is that Tosfos says a person should drink mole lugma, which means cheekful. And if you see, there's a star over there, and that takes you to the Gilyon Hashas, and the other commentaries question this. It really should be revius, maybe. So the point is that when it comes to drinking, what is the amount that one needs to recite an after bracha? So the amount a person needs in order to fulfill the mitzvahs of drinking, and this is interesting, in order to fulfill the mitzvahs of drinking, it's the size of, how much is a cheekful? Cheekful is every person according to their mouth. It's not a set amount. An olive size is a set amount. A cheekful is subject to each person individually. And we do have a little guideline, and that is that it's definitely, well, I shouldn't say definitely, it's generally more than the size of a kazayas. It's more than the size of an olive, and it's more than the size of a half of a egg. So that's the size. So if, let's say, for example, the size of a or more than the the size of a half of a revius. That's the amount. More than the size. A revius means a quarter of a lug, and that's a common measurement, the size of a revius. And whenever we drink wine, I mentioned on Friday, I just touched on it before we concluded, that whenever a person drinks wine, there's always a question of reciting an after bracha, the exact measurement for the after bracha. So we always tell you, drink more than a revius. Drink at least a revius. A revius is argument of the rabbis how much it is. It's around 3 ounces. The smallest size, or 5 ounces, would be like a very large size. They do have a joke about how people are extra careful nowadays with their measurements. People are very strict. They want a large kiddush cup. This kiddush cup is not small, is too small for, I'm very machmir. They have a joke where they found the Chafetz Chaim's kiddush cup, and they gave it to his great grandson. And the great grandson said, "Oh, I can't use that cup because it's not enough. It's not the size. It's not enough of a measurement for me. I'm more machmer than my great grandfather, the Chafetz Chaim." So that's a joke they use, implying that people have become very machmer, very strict when it comes to these measurements. But the idea is that there are different opinions. The common opinion is the lenient view, actually, and that is Reb Chaim Noah, which is somewhere around 3 ounces, maybe 2.9. But it's approximately 3 ounces is a revius.
Is it still half an egg?
What is that?
Still the size of half an egg?
No. A revius is, if I'm not mistaken, an egg and a half.
Because you said before half an egg, so I'm
yeah. No. Now, a half of a revius, I meant to say, a half of a revius, more than half of a revius would be around where the size of a cheekful would be measured, which would mean that if a person would put their liquid to one side of their mouth, they drank something and put it to one side of their mouth, how much would that measure? And that their mouth looks full, that their cheek looks full, and that's at least the size of a half of a revius. Maybe more, depends on the person, of course, and that would be a measurement for how much a person drinks in order to fulfill their obligation of the brachas on Kiddush and on Havdalah, and that would be the measurement. The only thing is that regarding an after bracha, it's not so clear what the after bracha, the size of an after bracha would be regarding drinking. Regarding eating, we know the after bracha is a kazayas. Regarding drinking, what is the size of the after bracha? And at what point are you in a gray area? And so Taisus over here mentions that he uses the word male lugmav, but the other commentaries, they mention it should be revius. So if a person wants to get themselves out of problems, they drink a revius, they have fulfilled their obligation, which would be 3 ounces or more. You fulfilled your obligation of reciting an after bracha for drinking. But it does seem to be a little vague and unclear with regard to that there might be a measurement of a kazayas even regarding drinking, that it could be maybe it's the size of an olive, which would be much smaller. And that's why I mentioned on Friday that when it comes to wine, there's reason to recite, you could always recite a first bracha, but there's reason to drink more in order to be sure when it comes to reciting the after bracha. Now, Taisus then jumps and says that the bracha b'orei nefashos is not considered a significant bracha, according to the Ri. One of the opinions of one of the rabbis of Taisus holds that b'orei nefashos is not significant, and even less than a measurement, you would recite a b'orei nefashos, even if you're reciting it on less than any size. When it comes to the b'orei nefashos bracha, you could recite it just like the beginning bracha. You could recite a b'orei nefashos. Now, that is a very interesting view. Keep in mind that we did say earlier in our Gemaras, maybe twice, that it's called v'loi klum. The after bracha b'orei nefashos is called nothing. That as an after bracha, you don't ever recite any after bracha. And the commentaries explain it means you don't recite a ala michya or a grace after meal, but you do recite a b'orei nefashos. So when we use the term it's v'loi klum, it's not really anything. The b'orei nefashos after blessing, that b'orei nefashos after blessing is, when we say it's v'loi klum, it means it's not a very significant after blessing that would require a measurement, and even less than any measurement, any size, you would recite a b'orei nefashos. Now, this view is not accepted, but it is mentioned in Taisus, and Taisus does deal with it. Now, if you take that view, the reason I'm mentioning it to you now is I want you to think about how that fits with our Gemara, because our Gemara mentioned that the olive that he recited a bracha on might, because it was salted, it might not have been a ha'etz bracha. He might have recited a shahakol miyabvari bracha. Now, what would have the after blessing been if he recited a shahakol on the cooked or salted olive? What would the after bracha be on that olive? B'orei nefashos, right? If he recited an ha'etz on the olive, so the after bracha would be a al ha'etz, would be like a ala michya, the summary of the grace after meal, the large paragraph. That would be the after blessing, because he's eating one of the 7 species. But if cooked foods are different than regular foods, for example, an olive that's salted, which would be considered like it's cooked, so the bracha, initial bracha, would have been shahakol. So the after bracha on that food would be a b'orei nefashos. Now the Gemara asks, how did he recite an after bracha on this olive? He's missing the measurement. My question is, does that Gemara work together with the Ri? Do you find any question there, or does everything seem to work fine? Has anyone bothered with anything? Again, the Ri holds that a b'orei nefashos you don't need any measurement for. You can recite the after blessing. So, for example, according to the Ri, this would apply to drinks. It would apply to meat or eggs or cheese or any foods that are shahakol, the after blessing, or fruits and vegetables, the same thing. the after blessing would be bari nefashis, and as long as it's not from the 7 species. So if the after blessing is bari nefashis, there's no measurement. You could recite an after blessing even on just eating a drop, even a crumb, tiny piece of apple. Recite a bari nefashis. Now, does that fit with our Gemara? Because our Gemara says that how did Rabbi Yochanan eat this olive and recite a bracha before and after? There's not a measurement, so there's no you don't have the right amount because you didn't eat the pit. Does that really fit with the Re's halacha that bari nefashis is not in the same category and league of the other after blessings, and it doesn't need any amount for the after blessing? So the question is, I don't see anyone acknowledging this question, but the question would be, how would the Re learn our Gemara? If he says you don't need an amount for an after blessing, so what is our Gemara's question? How did Rabbi Yochanan say an after blessing on the olive? You don't have the measurement. The answer is you don't need a measurement. There's not a question. You don't have a measurement. That's a question. You don't need. It was right. Bari nefashis. You don't need any measure. Any amount is good enough for bari nefashis.
But
so you could ask on the Gemara. You could ask a question on him from the Gemara. Yes, Ben.
I think, but it depends on what the bracha was before.
Correct. That's true. That's true. But there is the option that it's a shahakal bari nefashis. So this seems to be a little question on the Re, but the answer is maybe along what Ben was gonna try to say, is that this question you have to say is assuming the other understanding of the story, meaning the only way you can explain this question is the Gemara is asking the question based on the assumption that the Gemara had earlier that the bracha on the cooked olive, the salted cooked olive, is considered bari priya eitz. On that assumption, how could he have recited an after blessing? But according to the other understanding of the Gemara, that he really recited a shahako on the salted / cooked olive, on that assumption that it was shahako, the Gemara is not even asking question. There's no question on that. The only question is based on the assumption of the Gemara earlier, and that's how the Re would learn. So it's just important to keep that in mind. When the whole idea of learning the Gemaras is everything has to. We want to make sure that we understand the commentaries properly, and if something doesn't fit with the Gemara, obviously we're understanding the commentary wrong. Yes, Susan.
Okay, I'm looking at this card, the blessing card. It says on vegetables, over earth-grown fruits or vegetables, earth-grown. If it's hydroponic, is that considered, even though, in other words, it's chemicals that help and it's in water? I mean, is that considered earth-grown since it's, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a big question. I know they discuss it about hydroponics, and it comes like I think people ask about it, especially for the bitter herbs on Pesach, and they over here in this book they mention that on hydroponics.
The only reason I ask is I have a lot of success growing tomatoes, hydroponic tomatoes. I have they're much easier to take care of.
In the opinion of many authorities, one cannot recite Huadama on hydroponically grown vegetables. However, the response of Shvat Halevi, which is very reliable, who rules that one does recite the normal bracha. So it seems like quite a big argument about hydroponics. In recent times, this question has become more pertinent as becoming more popular. One who eats hydroponically grown vegetables should recite a shahakol, they say, in order to avoid a questionable bracha, because most vegetables are grown normally.
Rabbi,
When
what blessing
on
would
any
you
vegetable
say?
you buy, you can assume that it's not hydroponically. Now he says that bean sprouts do require ha'adama, even though they're sprouted in water. It's not a new growth; it's just the sprouting of the bean. The bean itself was grown normally and requires a ha'adama, so the sprouts would also be. But regarding the other fruits and vegetables, this book, which is the Art Scroll Halacha, Rabbi Forst holds that the hydroponics, a person should cover all grounds and recite a shahakol. I don't know if lately, if that, the latest, this book was written in 1990. So could be that the consensus of many of the common poskim authorities have maybe changed their mind since then. I mean, 30 years later, but there definitely are there were two views, two acceptable views. It seems to me like ha'adama might have become more popular to recite the bracha ha'adama, only because I think when it comes to romaine lettuce, that a lot of people were getting at one point hydroponically grown romaine lettuce. I may be wrong, but I think people were getting it for the Seder. Actually, the place to look this up would be in Rabbi Blumenkranz's book, which I might have. And he might discuss this, and this is a little more, it's a little more current.
Can I add to that question, Rabbi?
Sure. What would you like to add?
I wanted to add, what bracha would you say on seaweed? Because seaweed is always grown on water, so.
Yeah, but it's rooted in land before it frees itself and then floats away.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know these things, but I did look it up because one of the popular snacks nowadays is
dried seaweed.
These seaweed snacks. I don't know if you know, but like in Costco, they sell like little packages of salted sesame oil seaweed, roasted sesame oil seaweed, very popular. And I did look it up, and the bracha that they advised was shahakol. Why? I don't understand how it grows. Somehow it's not grow. It sounded like it doesn't really grow in the ground. It's in the water, but I don't know. I guess we could look it up. I found it online. So you might be able to find the same article that I found. So I'm not arguing with you, Robert. I understand. I just know what I saw on the internet.
Yeah. The other question is, I buy hydroponic cucumbers, the small ones, the Persian ones, but after 3 or 4 days, the skin starts sliding off. It's like they're genetically altered, and they're not the real vegetable when they began. So for me, it's like, I'm not interested in eating genetically altered meat nor vegetables. And so that's a conundrum. So the powers that be understanding that as a dynamic as well, that got, some people call it Frankenstein food. I'm not going to go that far, but, that's what I see. When I buy it, it's great. It's whole. After about 4 or 5 days, I take it out and I wash the outside and the skin slides off. Anybody else have that experience?
No, but hydroponic tomatoes don't last that long either.
Well, the tomatoes start growing from the inside out, and you see sprouts coming out of the skin after a while. Then you know that they were hydroponic or genetically altered.
Yeah.
They essentially breed them to last longer and for a longer shelf life. And they're really artificial in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So it's a conundrum.
Okay, here, he does talk about it. He talks about it regarding the Belgian endives,
right? Okay,
which some people used for moror. He says, "What is the bracha on them?" Especially those that grow hydroponically. Some say shahakal, others say it's still ha'adama. Many halachic issues involve fruits and vegetables that are grown in a liquid chemical solution, hydroponics. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, he quotes another few rabbis, are of the opinion that they're similar to mushrooms, about what we'll see on the next page of the Gemara, say they do not obtain their nourishment from the ground, and one recites a shahakal on them. However, the Yechavad Das writes that if one recited Hoitz or Adama over these grown hydroponics, he need not repeat the bracha. But preferably it would be shahakal. But if you did recite the other bracha, you don't have to repeat it. Rabbi Vosner notes in his notes to the Shulchan Aruch, chapter 204, says that it would seem to be more appropriate to recite Hoitz or Adama on such fruits and vegetables, since that is the proper bracha for that type of food, which is normally grown on the ground. One cannot bring proof from mushrooms where the proper bracha is shahakal, since all mushrooms grow in a manner in which they do not derive their nourishment from the ground. It would seem that in regard to certain bean sprouts, which are typically grown through hydroponics, wow, he wants to say even Rabbi Vosner would admit that the bracha would be shahakal. That's the exact opposite of the conclusion of Rabbi Fort's book. Certain bean sprouts, which are typically grown through hydroponics. See, Rabbi Vosner is basing it on the fact that they're grown in the ground, therefore it would be Adama. So according to that, Rabbi Blumenkrantz wants to say, well, it sounds like then any sprouts that normally are not grown in the ground, they should be shahakal. While the Art Scroll book seemed to think that beans that grow, because it grows from the bean, which is grown in the ground, it's just a continuation of the bean, and therefore they would be ha'adama. Interesting. So he doesn't really clarify it here.
Well, tomatoes are growing from a seed too. The seed was grown from the Adama.
Right.
I guess it depends on, there's growth and there's growth. Are you creating something from a seed, or you're just having a little a growth from a bean that's continuing its growing?